All right, guys, for this episode of On a Budget, we're going to show you how to do some cooking on a budget for your holiday. So you probably already celebrated Thanksgiving if you celebrate that, but other winter holidays are coming up like Christmas, or perhaps you celebrate Kwanzaa or Hanukkah or something of the sorts, or you're just someone that likes the winter solstice and you enjoy celebrating it. So we're going to show you how to cook a nice turkey dinner, a holiday dinner today. I'm going to start with some prep work here. So I'm going to take the carrots here, guys, and we're just going to snip off the ends of them. These are pre-washed carrots. Make sure if you get carrots that are not pre-washed, you wash them or scrub them. If you want, you can skin them. However, if they're nice and washed, all these little ribs and stuff aren't going to hurt anything. These are going to be roasted. They're going to add a ton of flavor to our turkey, so it's not a big deal. Please save these though, because you can always use these or the skins that you peel off, and you can make stock or soup or make other delicious things out of them. We're actually going to do a future episode and we'll show you how to use some food scraps to stay on a budget and save money that way. So we're going to do a few carrots. We're just going to actually prep them by cutting them off, and if one is thicker this way, we could cut it in half so it's a little thinner. But these are actually going to create a base for our turkey, and that's going to allow airflow to go through our turkey. So we have some carrots here. We also have some celery. Now this celery is a little bit older, but it's going to be fine because, again, we're going to cook it down and roast it, so it's not a big deal. This is also great if you have other older baby carrots or older celery, or any vegetables that are real flavorful in your fridge that are kind of going bad and aren't looking their best. This is perfect to use to flavor your turkey or any meat if you're going to roast it, and cook it down so you can still eat it. So we're actually just going to cut off these ends. Again, we'll save these, and we're actually just going to cut off these ends. And again, save those. So then we have some celery ribs, and then finally we'll do some garlic and onions. So for our garlic and onions, we don't actually have to chop these all the way down. We could actually just put these into quarters, and I'll show you when we go to dress the turkey why we can keep them in quarters and not slice them up. Again, save these onion peels. I think these are the most important things to save. You can make all kinds of soups and broths and things out of onion peels. They really have a lot of flavor, and half the time whenever you take the peel off, you still have some flesh under that peel. And then a little trick for garlic is to press it between your palms. This is a very hard piece of garlic. You can usually bust out some cloves doing it that way. And we'll just cut off the ends here, and then we also do not need to chop these up. These are just going to go right in our stock pot or right in our roasting pan, and these are going to flavor up our turkey. And then of course we have some herbs left over. This is some thyme that we got. And then I have some frozen parsley from before. Any herbs that you have would be really good. Things that are usually considered poultry blends will be great for our turkey. So parsley, thyme, sage, rosemary, things like that. But this is how we're gonna prep the turkey, and I'll show you how to stuff it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you guys how to dress the turkey. Of course, dressing the turkey doesn't mean I'm going to put clothes on him, but I'm going to, that's a term that's used to mean whenever you put all the seasonings on him, stuff him, and take out all of his giblets and get him prepared. So this is the frozen turkey that we got on sale when we did the shopping on a budget episode. We've kept him in the freezer. He has had time to thaw out, a few days in fact. You want to give them time to thaw out. And now we're going to open him up and get him ready. So this can be a messy process. I suggest if you have a clean workspace to put some saran wrap down or plastic wrap or something to catch some of the juices just to help. Of course, you're going to have to sanitize this and clean it after, but this just helps with cleanup. So we're going to take him out. He is a 17-pound turkey, so he weighs a good bit. So he's going to take a little while to cook. Something if you buy a butterball turkey, they do have cooking instructions on the side of the label that gives you recommendations for how long to cook him, how many people he feeds, and how long to thaw him. So keep that in mind. You can also always Google how long it takes to cook a turkey based on the weight that you pick up, but a good rule of thumb is for every pound of meat or every pound that the turkey is, you need 13 to 15 minutes of cooking time. So you're gonna unbound your turkey, which basically means you're gonna take this little flesh of skin near the tail portion and take it off the legs. Sometimes they will use little twine or twist ties to do this. Some places will just use parts of the turkey itself. He still is a little bit frozen there, which means he probably could have used another day to thaw. But that's okay, we're gonna cook him today anyways, and I'll show you how to do that. It does make it easier the more malleable they are. So usually in the cavity there is where all of his giblets are going to be. And so you're gonna need to stick your hand in there and pull those out. Usually they come in a casing. They'll also stick the neck in there, which is great to make gravy, so we're gonna keep that. We're gonna flip them over. If the giblets are not in the cavity, they will often stick them in the front cavity. So I don't know if you can see there, that was essentially the butt of the turkey. This is where the head would have been. And sometimes they will stick the giblets and the hearts and the organs in there. You of course can make all kinds of stuff with this as well. You can put this into your gravy, you can roast this. So this is valuable too. You don't want to throw that away. And then after you have all the giblets and the neck out of the turkey and you're ready to fill him and season him, you're gonna wanna make a seasoning blend ahead of time, so that way once your hands get turkey juice and turkey on them, you don't have to touch your seasoning spices or anything like that to contaminate them. So it's nice to make a nice big bowl of your seasoning blend that you can just dip your fingers in and then wash it afterwards. This seasoning blend has a lot of salt and pepper. It has some garlic salt and onion powder, as well as some poultry seasoning and a good bit of paprika. And then it also has some nutmeg, some cinnamon, and some pumpkin pie spice. So these might be spices that you traditionally think go on something like pumpkin pie or a dessert, but adding a little bit of these to your holiday savory cooking is also very delicious. The pumpkin pie spice, you could get away with just using this. This has cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, allspice, all in it. So you could get away with just using that to add a little bit of holiday flavor. So after we have our spice blend, we're gonna take this and we're going to rub him down with this. So we wanna get nice on that skin because that's gonna give good crispy flavor. Make sure we get his legs. And then make sure we put some in the cavity too. Don't forget inside the cavity, because that's going to perfume the turkey from the inside out. So we're going to put a good bit inside of his cavity. And then we are also going to flip him and get his underside here. There's a lot of meat on the underside, And while that's usually sitting down on the plate and isn't what gets displayed or showcased whenever you cook or when you serve, that's a lot of meat to make sure that we're seasoning. Something else that we can do that will really help bring flavor is we can gently, very gently separate the skin from the meat. So you can see I did that with my thumb there. I just slid my thumb in there and started to separate the skin from the meat, going back and forth. We can put seasoning as well as some fats like butter between those layers of skin and meat. That's going to help the meat season and the skin get crispy. So once you get your thumb in there, you can slide some fingers in there, and you're just going to separate gently without tearing the skin from the meat. So after you have your turkey mainly seasoned, we're gonna toss them in our roasting pan. So we're gonna take those vegetables and all the things we prepped earlier, and we're going to take our carrot ribs and our celery ribs, and we're going to make a sort of lattice pattern, or like a little stage, you could say, for your turkey to roast on. So we're just gonna alternate some celery ribs and some carrot ribs, and this is going to help airflow underneath the turkey, so that way it cooks evenly from the inside out, so it gets done faster, so it stays moister and crispier. So we're just going to put those along the side. Just like that. And then we are going to place Mr. Turkey on there. Before you place Mr. Turkey on there though, if you would like, if you removed that skin and you put some seasoning, you can also add some melted butter in there to really help keep those turkey breasts moist. White meat and poultry oftentimes dries out, especially during long roasting periods if it's a larger bird. So adding some fats back into the breasts will help maintain their moisture. So to do that, it could be a little tricky. If you have someone to help, like an older child or your spouse or a family member, have them hold the cavity open for you while someone else pours in the butter. But you can do it by yourself as well. You just have to be a little more dexterous to hold open that cavity. Take your butter, use something with a good spout on it, and then just pour some of that melted butter in there. And you can see it's starting to fill that cavity and go all through into those breasts. And you can just massage that onto the meat and distribute it, so that way as it cooks, it will protect that meat from drying out. And then you're gonna take your tom and you're gonna sit him on your ribs. Then you can clean up your plastic wrap, and you have a good bit of the ick in there. And then we're finished dressing him. So then we're gonna take the rest of our supplies, like our onions. You can toss some of those in there. Put them around the sides. Take a few cloves of garlic. Put a few in him and around the sides. Take whatever you have left of your carrot. You can toss a carrot in there and a piece of celery. And put whatever you have around the sides. Taking a big chunk of parsley and some other herbs. You can put a large chunk inside him to help perfume, as well as around the sides for the drippings. And then once you have all of your herbs in there, he's ready to go in the oven. You can also put things like thyme and sage in there. as well as some rosemary. Those are really great herbs along with parsley. If you have chives or shallots or anything like that too, those will be really great to give him flavor. I usually like to take this little bundle and stick him in there as well and really put it back so that way the herbs don't burn while you're roasting. It can happen a little bit and it's not going to change it too much, but it will just help so that way you get a good flavor as opposed to a burnt charcoal flavor. And then you can take a bunch of extra herbs and put them around the sides. Thyme is probably my favorite herb to use for this, and just in general, I think it gives a lot of great flavor. You could also toss in things like mushrooms, maybe even some broccoli, like I said, shallots, green onions, anything else you have. And then we're going to finish off with some more melted butter and or some olive oil or something that's a neutral oil over the top. And once you have that, you're ready to put him uncovered in the oven. We're gonna keep an eye on him and check on him every like 30 to 45 minutes. Once he gets a good golden brown, we're gonna cover him up with foil or with the top of our roaster pan so that way the skin and the meat doesn't dry out. All right, as your turkey is in the oven roasting, you can get working on all of your sides. So I'm gonna prep for you the stuffing first. This can be ready in a pan. The last step to it will be once you take the turkey out and you're letting it cool, you can take some of the juice and the drippings from the turkey, which are very delicious, and make your stuffing as well as make your gravy. So to make this stuffing, we are going to use some older or partially stale bread. We talked about this on the shopping on a budget episode where getting old bread to use for breadcrumbs, stuffing, anything like that is a great idea because normally you actually want older bread that's not quite as soft to make things like breadcrumbs and stuffing. And so either purchasing really cheap bread to do it or using older bread that's going bad in your pantry is a great way to save money and still make something really delicious even for the holidays. So I'm going to take some of that bread and I'm just going to cut it up into some nice bite-sized chunks. Some people enjoy putting their stuffing inside the bird while it cooks. And while that does allow a lot of the juices from the turkey to soak into the stuffing, it doesn't allow you to put any type of aromatics like the herbs or the onion or the garlic into the bird to help perfume it. So the meat, of course, has the meat flavor, but it doesn't really taste like anything else. And so I prefer to put the aromatics in the bird so that way the meat and the juices that drip off all taste very good, and then take the juices and put them into the stuffing and bake the stuffing that way. So that way you get the best of both worlds. So the stuffing tastes really good, the meat tastes really good, and you have leftover drippings to use for your gravy. You, of course, can take some of your bread and stuff it into the bird. Another issue I find with doing the traditional method of putting the bread in the bird to make the stuffing is the cavity is only so big, so you get a very small amount of stuffing. And if you're someone that likes stuffing or you have a big family to feed, you're gonna want or need a lot more stuffing than what's gonna fit in there. So this is a good alternative. But you're just gonna take those pieces and you're just going to cut them into bite-sized chunks. You can rip little pieces off too. That is more than acceptable. This bread, while it was on sale, it's actually very soft and tender still and would make really good for toast or garlic bread if you wanted to make out of it, or butter bread on the side if you're a family that always likes to have butter bread with your meals. And you can mix and match the breads you use. The breads I have here One is just a white loaf with toasted sesame seeds on it, and the other one is actually a rye bread. So I really like rye bread. It gives a lot of flavor and a lot of texture, especially if you're going to use it in a recipe. So I'm gonna mix and match these two breads to make my stuffing today. And to cut bread, you can notice here, it's kind of smushing down, but since we're gonna cook it, it's not a big deal. It's best to have a serrated knife, or perhaps even a bread knife that is specially made to cut bread. They have large serrations and they're very long compared to this, so you can do a really quick sawing motion down the bread. And like I said before, don't be afraid to just rip it. If pieces look a little too big or you didn't cut through them all the way, that's not a big deal. I find it kind of hard to believe they have at the store, you can purchase cut bread for stuffing. They wanted $5.49 for a bag that looked about to be the size of 2 loaves. I didn't even pay, what? It was a little over $3 for these 2 larger loaves that are going to more than make my stuffing. So you just have to watch there. Just because something's easier doesn't mean it's better. It's probably gonna cost you more. And half the time, it's not even that much of a trouble to rip apart some bread. It takes 5 more minutes than it would to take it out of a bag. It's probably gonna taste better. It's gonna be cheaper. And you can customize the types of bread you use. So once you have your plate full of your bread cubes and ripped off pieces, you're going to take some of that celery that's left and chop up some of the ribs to put in there. Celery is a classic stuffing flavor, celery and sage, so we're going to use some of that today. You can use these little pieces, these soft green leaf parts. They add a lot of flavor and they're usually very tender. Even though these aren't in the best condition, they're gonna cook up with the stuffing and they're gonna be good. We're gonna make sure that we cut this very fine into little pieces so that way it mixes with our stuffing easily. If you do not like celery, you're not a fan of celery, you do not have to put it in. You could just do the herbs, you could do parsley, you could do broccoli tops, you could do a scallion and green onion stuffing. That would be really good. You can really add whatever you want. I'm just kind of mirroring the traditional flavors that you would find in a holiday or turkey dinner in America. If you really identify with another culture or some ancestry that you have, feel free to do some really cool flavors that mirror those cultures. I know I have a friend in Japan currently, and he had duck, for Thanksgiving, so it wasn't turkey, but it was like a soy-based sauce that they put over their duck, and he said it was very delicious, which I bet it was. It was something different that really paid homage to the culture over there. So after you have some celery that is chopped up, you're just gonna toss that into your stuffing. You could always add more accordingly. I'm also going to put in some parsley. So I saved some of this parsley that I'm gonna put in there. Just chop that up real fine. Some sage again, because sage goes really well in the stuffing. Sage is also a very strong flavor. You don't need a ton of it to get the effects of the sage. Actually, a lot of fresh herbs, a good benefit of using them is you get a lot more flavor when they're fresh than when they're dried. Dried herbs are a great option for day-to-day cooking, because they're easy to store, they're cheaper, easier to find. You know, you don't have to constantly keep going out and buying them and worry that they're wilting or getting old. But when they're dried, they lose all of their oils, their essential oils in the leaves. Because whenever you have fresh herbs and you chop them up or you rough them up, you can really smell the oils that give off, and that's what gives all the flavor. I'm also going to add a little bit of thyme as well, just to mirror the flavors that we're doing in the turkey. So for thyme, you can chop up the ends here, but you can also just take the little sprigs, and if you just pull back on them from the way they're growing, you'll be left with a little bunch of thyme leaves. And then we can just toss those in. I usually take them, strip the sides, put those in, and then rip off the tender tops, leaving just the stem. And you can put as much herbage as you want in here. If you don't like any herbs, you don't have to, but I would suggest putting something green or something that adds, that brightens up the dish, because all these dishes that we're going to make today are very fat concentrated and they're very rich. So having things like herbs, like the parsley, the celery, greenery like that, really helps to lighten it up and cut through all of that. All right. Once you're satisfied with all your herbs in there, you can add a little salt and pepper to this, toss it up to combine, and then it's just waiting for our turkey drippings. Okay, as we have the turkey giblets in the stock pot, we're going to add a little butter or a little fat to them. And we really want to get a golden brown color on them. By searing these meat pieces, that's going to in turn give us a lot of flavor. Once we get a good sear on these, we're going to put the veggies in, and then we're going to just use some water to deglaze the pot. Deglazing the pot means that all the fond that accumulates at the bottom of the pan, all that like brown, slightly caramelized burny bits, gets picked up in whatever liquid we're using to deglaze. And that's going to give the broth a lot of flavor that we're going to use to help deglaze the turkey. So the biggest way to get really good flavors in your cooking is to take it slow and to really build upon those flavors. So instead of just using plain water to deglaze our turkey, we're making a broth out of the turkey giblets and the same type of vegetables and herbs we use to flavor the turkey, so that way we can really build a depth of flavor. As our turkey pieces are cooking and browning, we're going to add a little bit of salt to them. This of course will add flavor and season them, but also adding salt helps to draw the moisture out of things. So if you're ever trying to sear something or brown something, it's always good to add a little bit of salt during that process, because it's going to make it go faster and caramelize better. So make sure before you cut up your potatoes that you're going to wash them. Some potatoes come pre-washed in the bag, but most of them are not. They do take off a majority of the dirt, but there always is a little bit left over. We're going to make skin-on mashed potatoes today, so it's extra important that we wash the skins before we dice them up and cook them. After you wash your potatoes, we're just gonna dice them up into nice cubes. You wanna try and get the cubes to be around the same size. You don't have to stress about it, but that's going to allow them to cook at the same rate and not have pieces that are underdone or pieces that are overdone. So if you just wanna cut them into little chunks and then those chunks into quarters like this, and then you can put them directly in your pot. Some people like to soak their potatoes overnight. I generally don't, because sometimes depending on the species or the breed of potato, it can make them really gummy whenever you make them into mashed potatoes. But if it's for the holidays and you are pretty busy and you're going to be doing a lot of things the day of when you cook the meal, dicing potatoes the day before and putting them in a pot of water, of cold water, and then draining that water in the morning before you cook them is a good way to prep. So just cut those into quarters. And then once you have a good amount of potatoes, we're gonna add water and salt to them and bring them to a boil. So we're just gonna fill the pot up with water until all the potatoes are covered. We're going to add a little salt into the pot while we boil them. Adding salt to the water while you boil them is a great way to give them some flavor. And then we're going to put the burner on medium to high and cover them and allow them to boil. So once your turkey is done and has a nice golden brown on it, you're going to take it out and you're going to notice that there is a lot of drippings left over in the pan. Those are perfect to make our gravy and our stuffing. Our turkey was 17 pounds. It took about 3.5 hours to cook. It got a little done faster than I would have expected. The best way to check your turkey is if you have a thermometer and make sure that the inside of the turkey reaches 165 minimum. So after you take your turkey out and you collected those juices that were down in the pan, you can take the stuffing that we prepared earlier and we're gonna finish it up and toss it in the oven while we do the mashed potatoes, the green beans, and all the other sides. So here I just collected all the juices that were in the bottom. These have a ton of flavor. There's a good bit of fat and butter in there. So these are what is going to make our stuffing stick together and give it all of its good turkey flavor. So we're just gonna pour that over top of our stuffing. Use a good bit of it here. And then we're just going to mix and combine all that. If you find that your stuffing looks a little dry or you'd like it to be a little more rich, you could always add a few pats of butter. Just take a few teaspoons to tablespoons and you can put them across your stuffing, and as it bakes, that butter is going to melt down and go into your stuffing and give it a lot of richness. And then once you're satisfied with it, we're gonna pop it in the oven and keep an eye on it while we do the other sides. So after your potatoes have been boiling, you wanna periodically come and check them and use a fork and fork them to see how tender they are. If the fork goes easily into most of the pieces, that means your potatoes are done. You don't wanna, of course, undercook your potatoes because you're gonna have crunchy bits of potato in your mashed potatoes, but you also don't want to overcook them because they're going to release a lot more starch and they're going to become kind of gluey when you make them mashed potatoes and not be nice and fluffy. So these look about perfect. The fork's going in and they're starting to separate. So I'm going to take them off the heat and then carefully drain them in the sink and leave the potatoes in the pot. So after you drain your potatoes, you're just gonna leave them in the pot and you're just gonna bring them right back to the stove. They're gonna be nice and warm, which is going to be perfect for us to add our pats of butter. Thanksgiving is not the healthiest time of year. A lot of these recipes take a lot of fat or butter to really bring out the flavors in them. Mashed potatoes and carbs in general are also something that usually need a lot of fat and a lot of salt to season to taste. So we're gonna put a good bit of butter in there. That was a little over half a stick. We have a lot of potatoes in here though. We're gonna mix that all together in there. We're going to add more salt, about a pinch, and then we will taste in between once we get them the texture we want if we need to add more. A little bit of pepper. Again, we'll adjust as we go. And then we'll use a little bit of milk to help thin out the potatoes slightly and to make them creamy. This is fat-free milk, which you of course can use, but you will want a higher fat milk in general when you make mashed potatoes. They're not the healthiest thing, so splurge on some higher fat milk to make the smashing process a little easier. I do have a wooden spoon here, which will work, but if you have a potato ricer or a potato smasher, those work much better. They have little holes in them, so that way you can just push down on all the potatoes and they go through and they get nice and creamy for you without a lot of effort. But if you do not have that, you don't want to invest in one, using the back of a wooden spoon will work just as well. So one of our last sides before the gravy that we're going to make is the green beans. So these green beans we actually got during our shopping on a budget episode, and they've been in the freezer and they were just allowed to thaw, and we're gonna cook them up and they're gonna taste really great. So what we're gonna start with is about 2 tablespoons of butter into the pan. We're gonna get that melting there. And once you get that melting, we're actually going to use garlic and mushrooms to flavor our green beans. You could just do plain green beans with salt and pepper, but adding garlic, mushrooms, onions, topping them with nuts, adding herbs, anything like that, of course, is going to bring out more flavor. And that's of course what we want. So once you get your butter sizzling there and it's nice and heated up, we're just gonna toss those mushrooms in, and we're gonna allow those to cook for a few minutes before we add our green beans. We're going to add a pinch of salt. Of course, that's going to draw out the moisture like we talked about earlier, and it's going to allow them to sear faster and more evenly. And mushrooms hold a lot of moisture. They shrink a lot once you cook them down. Once we get these cooking, they're probably going to shrink to almost half the size. And they take also a lot of salt because they don't have they have a high water content and they don't have a lot of other flavor going on. And then of course we'll add a little pepper just for some basic seasoning. We're gonna let those cook down. So once your mushrooms are cooked down some and they're starting to reduce, right before we finish them off and before we add the green beans, we're going to take some minced garlic and we're just gonna toss that in, and we're going to cook it until it is fragrant. Fresh garlic can burn easily, but it will take a little bit longer to brown up than minced garlic will, because it has, again, a higher water content. So we're just gonna mix that around. I would say anywhere, depending on how high you have the heat and your pan, anywhere from like 45 seconds up to 2 minutes. I like mine a little more toasted, just because I, again, want that deep flavor as opposed to the fresh garlic flavor. So we're just gonna bring that around and let that get a little bit of color on it. So once you get some good color on there, with the garlic, and you can really smell it, and it starts to smell like good toasted garlic instead of fresh garlic. You're going to add your green beans. Now this is a really big bag. I'm probably not going to add the whole thing because this is a smaller pan. But you could also make green bean casserole, which is super common and popular. You could do cooked green beans. You could do all kinds of stuff with these. If you don't like green beans, of course you can do corn as a side. You could do carrots. Carrots in a pan with thyme and honey is really great. We are actually going to start a cookbook here at Earn. That's going to be mainly focused on quick and easy meals for a working person and for a family setting. So if you have any recipes that are like something you cook all the time, or something that's a family recipe that you would like to share and show off, start thinking about those, because we're going to start collecting recipes and create a cookbook that's based around Earn and Earn staff as well as Earn members, made by them. We're going to get those green beans and we're going to let them cook down for a little bit. So the last thing we're going to make before we dress everything and get the table prepared is our gravy. So we're going to start off with some butter in here, and then we're going to add our turkey neck. So we save that so that way we could get a lot of flavor, and we're going to sear that up, and then we're going to make what is called a roux, and then we're going to thin it out, add turkey broth and turkey drippings to it to get a homemade gravy. So we're just going to stick that in the pan, and we are going to let that sear on both sides as best as we can. So once you get some color, and you're going to get a lot of fond in the bottom of this pot, on your turkey neck, you're going to add more butter, because this is going to create the base for our roux. So here's about 2 tablespoons I'm going to toss in, and as soon as that butter is melted, I'm going to take this neck out and put it in our pan. We're going to use pan drippings as well as the broth we made earlier to thin out our gravy to the perfect consistency. So that little pat of butter, I'm just going to move them around, get him over top this turkey neck to get as much flavor from him as we can. And I should point out that I reduced the heat to medium up to medium low, because we don't want to burn our flour or our butter once we put it in like that, because otherwise our gravy is just going to taste burnt as opposed to flavorful. So that's looking pretty well cooked down. So I'm just going to take out the neck and put it beside me here into the leftover pan. And then from there, I have a 1/4 cup, a little less than a 1/4 cup of flour. I'm not necessarily going to add it all. I'm just going to base the texture. We want it to soak up a lot of that butter juices. You want it to be a thicker paste consistency, like this. And then once you get that, you're just going to let it sit and toast a little bit, because we do not want uncooked flour to eat it or to taste it. So once you get the flour combined and you have that consistency and you've let it sit for a while, you're going to start to smell it. There should be like a very faint nutty smell going on. That's the flour and the proteins in there caramelizing. It should turn a darker brown if it already wasn't brown, like a caramel color. And then from there, we can season it. So I'm going to put a good bit of salt in here and some pepper. And then I'm going to mix that around, and I'm going to go into my pan drippings that are left, and I'm going to add that to our gravy. So right beside me is the pan drippings. There's leftover juices as well as chunks of onion and carrot in here. You could of course add that and then blend up your gravy. We're just going to add the drippings at this point. So I'm just going to add those right in. All those drippings are going to be the main flavor of your gravy, so you can add those to taste, and also so that way you start to thin out your gravy. It's going to help finish cook it as well, and then we're going to add that broth to thin it to the right texture. So the key is to just keep stirring so that way nothing burns at the bottom and that it's consistently combining. It might be a little hard at first. It's going to get extra thick. It actually might go a little thicker once you add the drippings before it goes thinner. And that's perfectly normal and fine. Since it was pretty dry before and didn't have a lot of moisture, it just had the fat and the flour. When you add that drippings that have moisture in them back into the butter and the fat in there, it's probably going to make a little sizzle, and it's going to thicken up that flour concoction that we made. And remember, that's called a roux. That's the basis for any type of gravy. You can use the same concept to make homemade mac and cheese sauce. You can use it to make cream of anything, cream of mushroom soup, cream of mushroom gravy. You can make cream of chicken soup as well. Anything that has like a chowder or a gravy-like consistency, you start with a roux. From there, we are going to take our homemade broth that we made, and we're just going to continuously pour this in as we stir it. We can pause to combine and to make sure that the mixture takes all of it. And then we'll add more and go back and forth until the gravy is the consistency that we want. Some people like really thick gravy, some people like really thin gravy. It's all up to you and what you want. As it sits, if you don't serve it directly super hot off the pot, it will thicken a little bit. So keep that in mind as you're settling on the consistency. And then once you have it to the consistency that you like, I like it a little runny so it can go over everything, but still has some viscosity to it. You're gonna let it on the stove for another minute or two just so all the flavors can mix, and then you are ready to serve it. And there you guys have it, Christmas dinner on a budget. A lot of these things were in the freezer, a lot of these things were on sale. It's really not too hard to make a homemade Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving or holiday dinner. You just have to put in a little effort. I hope you guys liked this episode of On a Budget, and we'll see you next time.